Good afternoon, everybody.
Afternoon.
I was just in the car riding over here and was listening to the radio. And as soon as I got in my car, cut the radio on, it was Aretha Franklin. And what was the song that Aretha Franklin was singing? No, it was Spanish Harlem. So I thought that was real appropriate for, I thought it was real appropriate for what I was getting ready to come to. And so I looked up the lyrics. And there is a rose in Spanish Harlem, a red rose up in Spanish Harlem. It is a special one, it's never seen the sun. It only comes out when the moon is on the run and all the stars are gleaming. It's growing in the street right up through the concrete, but soft and sweet and dreaming. I didn't quite get those lyrics in sync, but that's what it was saying. But the lyrics denote the they denote how the plights of black folks and Hispanics intersect or correspond. And, the hardship, the economic plight that we have all experienced as people, that's kind of what that indicates. And so I had a speech prepared. There's really no need for me to give it because I've already pretty much given you the essence of what I was going to say. But I will say that it's important that people whose experiences intersect and correspond, it seems only fitting that those folks would create a coalition. Why? Because that coalition represents political power, and politics opens up economics. And so if we can put that political power together to work for our communities, for our people, we'll be much better off for it. And so I think that is pretty much the purpose of this session today, is to talk about that. So today we have Clarissa Martinez de Castro, is the Deputy Vice President of the National Council of La Raza. She is a celebrated scholar of immigration policy and the Latino electorate. Donald Cravens is the Executive Director of the Washington Bureau of the National Urban League and former state senator from Louisiana, and a great resource of political engagement at the national, state, and local levels. Hernando Viveros Cabezas is the President and CEO of the Afro-Colombian Global Initiative, which will provide a global perspective, or who will provide a global perspective on the political engagement of Afro-Latinos in Colombia specifically, and Latin America generally. And Gusnerth Josu Perea, Josue, Gusnerth Josue Pereira, the Director of Communications for the Afro-Latina Forum, will discuss what it means to be an Afro-Latino and a special role they play as a bridge between the African American and Latino communities. Alejandra E. Castillo is the National Director of the U.S. Department of Commerce's Minority Business Development Agency. She will discuss the administration's perspective and programs to increase the role of minority-owned businesses. I would be remiss to not mention that we are also hosting a panel on increasing the role of minority-owned businesses in military contracting. That'll be tomorrow at 1:30 p.m. in this very same room. We also have Carol Fraser Hainsworth, the founder of Flourish and Bloom Entertainment, who will give her unique perspective of the challenges and opportunities she's faced as a small business owner who is of both African and Latino descent. Kevin Gilbert from the Executive Committee of the National Education Association will discuss the challenges our communities face in education and the vital role that education plays in our common goal for a more just and equal society. I would like to personally thank this August panel for not only volunteering their valuable time to contribute to this important discussion, but for dedicating their life's work on behalf of our communities. And lastly, I'd like to welcome my dear friend, our forum moderator, Dr. Ramona Houston. She is a scholar and educator and a community activist whose work in the community I have greatly appreciated firsthand. I look forward to an exciting discussion, and Dr. Houston, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon. We are so excited about having this panel. Thank you so much for attending. This is an important and timely discussion we need to have between the African American and Latino communities. Of course, I would like to acknowledge the staff who's put so much time and energy into organizing this panel. Alam Tawalder over here, wave, he's on the congressman's staff. The rest of the congressman's staff who came in, the chief of staff, Arthur Sidney, is he here yet? Would like to acknowledge him. Where is he? Okay. And then, of course, the congressman's wife, Attorney Merida Johnson. Could you stand and be acknowledged? She's the former chair of the CBC Spouses Organization, and we're delighted to have her here today. And then, of course, my family is here. It's nothing like having a affirming family. My grandmother celebrated her 90th birthday last week, and she's from Texas, and she came to Atlanta to visit us for a couple of weeks, so I asked her a couple of days ago if she wanted to come. Izora Jones, could you wave or stand up? This is her first CBC, so she's delighted to be here. Yes. So the purpose of this conversation is really to promote a dialogue between the African American and Latino communities. As you know, we have similar common issues that we both face, but yet it has always seemed to be fissures between the two communities in our efforts to create social change and come together on common issues. Just to give you a little about my background, I'm from a small town called Brownwood, Texas, which is a small town in central Texas, and in my communities, the African American and Latino communities overlapped. My grandfather was the first black elected official in Brown County, and he was elected because of his relationships with Mexican Americans. In fact, he won one of his elections by 2 votes. My family has a long history of having relationships within the Mexican American community there. I grew up going to Mexican dances and weddings, quinceañeras. In fact, I had a quinceañera. I studied foreign study when I went to graduate school, undergrad, at the Rio School, Clark Atlanta University. He's a graduate too. Went to Oaxaca to study Spanish. And it was so funny being there and eating. People would say, don't touch that. And when we were eating, and she's like, ella come chile. And then I couldn't understand why they were so excited that I was eating chile, but they saw me as different. So I grew up with this identity of being both black and Mexican. And in fact, it wasn't until I got to graduate school and attended my first National Association of Chicana and Chicano Studies, where everybody kept asking me why I was there. And I couldn't understand why everybody was asking me why I was there. And then finally, I called home and spoke to my father, and my parents actually, and my father said, oh, you finally found out you weren't Mexican. And so I had an identity shock, real identity shock, because I had always claimed that I was kind of biracial in my own mind. So thank God that only lasted for one day. And I decided that it was more important not how others defined me, but how I defined myself. And so I started claiming that I was bicultural and not necessarily biracial. And that grew into my interest, my family's background grew into my interest in studying black-brown relations in Texas, because they always said that blacks and browns need to be together to address common concerns. And then that, of course, evolved to my interest in studying American history. So my area as a PhD is in American history, where I focus on African American and Mexican American history and our efforts to create social change. So my role as a scholar is to create synergy between these two communities. And I do this through my writing, speaking, and through the projects that I work on. And you can find more about me and my work on RamonaHouston.com. But when we look at African American and Mexican American history and Black Latino relations generally, because the community is broad and diverse, we see that we have parallel historical experiences living in the U.S. We both have had unequal status, and we've both been marginalized as communities. We've been stereotyped with certain stereotypical characteristics because of our perceived race. We've been stereotyped as dirty, foul, ignorant, that our cultures don't promote excellence. I was in graduate school, and one of the law professors at the University of Texas said that blacks and Latinos don't excel academically because our cultures don't promote excellence. And that was in the 1990s. So we're not too far removed from that. We've been stereotyped as being criminal, as being shiftless, lazy. And this has these stereotypes have perpetuated our marginalization in society. We've been racialized similarly in popular culture. Everybody familiar with Birth of a Nation? Anybody here? I saw on the schedule that they're screening a Birth of a Nation here. But has anybody heard that there was also a movie called Birth of Texas, which it was a protege of D.W. Griffith, who did the same film using some of the same actors in blackface that were supposed to be what Texas looked like under Mexican rule. And it has the same similar themes that ran in this movie. Redemption, how the South looked under black and Mexican rule. I'm comparing the two movies. The chaos under the rule, nonsense and buffoonery of the leadership, laziness and shiftlessness of black and Latino leaders, the violation of white womanhood, and of course, who comes in to save the day? The KKK. And so you see these two movies and you see how we've been stereotyped similarly. Then when you look at our experiences, our political experiences, our social experiences, as well as our economic experiences, we see why, because of these historical experiences, why our two communities have been marginalized in similar ways. And we look at this in terms of various aspects, which our panel is going to cover. If we look at health, we have inadequate access to health care and health care insurance. Health disparities, we disproportionately suffer from obesity, high blood pressure, heart disease, diabetes, and even children, Latino and African American children are now suffering high proportions of diabetes now. Teenage pregnancies, high percentage of HIV and AIDS cases, drug and alcohol addiction. When we look at education, we have poor schools in predominantly African American and Latino communities, excessive high dropout rates in both of our communities. And when you look at the African American and Latino communities, it's almost 50% for Black and Latino males in terms of dropout rates. Our access to higher education is limited. And even when we get to higher education, our ethnic study programs at colleges and universities are currently being threatened because people don't see the need for those studies programs. Our economic statuses are similar. We have high unemployment rates, high underemployment rates, job mobility and reaching the glass ceiling, lack of representation in corporate boards and community boards, our lack of representation in terms of benefits and health insurance, youth unemployment, wage, salary, and wage discrepancies, and the high ceiling, the glass ceiling that many of us meet in our positions. Wealth disparities. We know that the home closures, we were overrepresented in home foreclosures. Financial literacy rates, access to entrepreneurship and access to capital. Justice, when you look at the fact that we can't afford, our communities can't afford adequate legal representation, and you see indigent defense as a major issue. Sentencing disparities, challenges with criminal justice, the fact that we are we're victims of police brutality and misconduct, high incarceration rates, recidivism rates, prisons for profit which are benefiting from our communities. And when we look at civic engagement and political empowerment and barriers to voting rights, gerrymandering, and our representation in local and national government, there are so many reasons that we should promote coalitions between our two communities. So the question becomes, if we have so many similar issues, why have the Black and Latino communities not worked good together as we normally should? And in my research, what I found in studying the desegregation of Texas, because Texas segregated both African Americans and Mexican Americans, that it's an issue of race. And race as a pun, the way we race each other in terms of racial difference, and then the way we race each other in terms of competition. And then also our communities have to face our own bigotries, right? We've heard the conversations of what African Americans say about Latinos, and Latinos know what Latinos say about African Americans. I've been fortunate enough to hear both conversations, you know, and so we need to really address our own bigotry in our communities. And then the last thing that has prevented us from working together is this whole idea that all of our community should be together before we reach out to other communities. Well, let me tell you, there'll never be a time when all African Americans are going to agree on anything. And there'll never be a time when all Latinos are going to agree, right? We just got to work with where we are today. So there's also a complexity of other issues, especially in terms of identity. Our communities are diverse and not monolithic. We're going to discuss this. The panel is going to discuss this in terms of national, ethnic, cultural, and regional diversity. The diversity in terms of hierarchy and race. I know that many people, African Americans, have a certain distrust of Latinos because many say they think they're white. And in reality, that has been a reality in some parts where certain people, depending on your phenotype and your economics, that you have access to honorary whiteness as Latinos, whereas Black people can never have, no matter how light-skinned they are or how much money they have. And so that causes a little distrust. The identity is complex in terms of Afro-Latinos. You know, Afro-Latino identity in America, the question is, are they going to be African-American or Latino? Because that's what the census wants us to choose between the two when we should be able to embrace both of our identities. So despite the challenges, there are a lot of ways we can come together: intellectual capital, human capital, financial capital, and political capital. Ultimately, our communities must embrace our role and responsibility as Americans, that we're not only addressing issues in the African American and Latino communities, but with us becoming the majority in America's society, we have to make America all that it can and should be. because we have a responsibility as Americans to make America live up to its ideas. So we are so happy to have these panelists here. The session order is that we're going to have each panelist to have a few minutes to discuss their particular issue. We have the panelists here are going to talk about economics, they're going to talk about politics, they're going to talk about entrepreneurship, they're going to talk about nonprofit management, they're talking about advocacy in terms of voting rights, with this being an election year. And then after that, we're going to have question and answer, because we really want to get dialogue with the people who are here in the audience and really come up with some solutions. And the last thing is we're going to have each of the panelists to offer what they believe that we can do individually as activists in our community, and what we can do collectively as a body in order that we can move this agenda forward in bringing our two communities together on a local level and a national level. So let us begin with Clarissa from the National Council of La Raza, and we're going to ask our panelists to limit their remarks to 5 minutes. I know it's hard to solve the challenges of African Americans and Mexican Americans and Latino Americans in 5 minutes, but we're going to try to do so. And then we have someone in the back telling you when you should pay attention to time. Thank you very much.
Well, let me start by saying that I am not going to solve all those things. So that way we can get on the right track. You know, I heard the theme of quinceañera, so I would say that 2016 is my quinceañera. And I know what some of you may be thinking, but it's my citizenship quinceañera. I became a citizen of the United States. I pledged allegiance to the flag of the United States of America in 2001. And maybe it's because of that, that as many immigrants who are drawn here by the ideal and aspiration that our country has, that I am so deeply interested in the notion of how do we strengthen our civil society to be able to fulfill those ideals. And I know right now, particularly given a lot of the deep wounds affecting our communities every day, it is easy to dismiss the ideal that is America because it's not living up to it. But I also think that, you know, as some folks said way back when, in order to form a more perfect union, that tells us from the get-go that this is a work in progress. And so I hope that part of this conversation is how we are all, each as individuals and organizations, trying to add our little contribution to that work in progress. So what I would, you know, when I often struggle with this. I work at the National Council of La Raza. We are the nation's largest Latino civil rights and advocacy organization. We work on a lot of the issues that you heard the laundry list of where our communities are struggling, underrepresented, and you know, where investments are needed. And I grapple sometimes thinking, you know, somebody from outside our communities who doesn't know our communities and hears that laundry list, which we as advocates sometimes start with, right? Because we're trying to make sure people are paying attention, could make almost anybody say, wow, that's beyond repair. How could anybody come out of that hole? But here's the incredible thing about our communities, is that it would almost be natural to assume that any one community, family, or individual facing those odds would be done for. And yet, both of our communities exhibit incredible resiliency every single day, that in spite of those odds, we continue to push ahead and try to make progress on those issues. Not because those obstacles are not important and because they are not they're the obstacles we're trying to address. But imagine if that level of resilience and agency that we show was starting from a more level playing field, right? If we're able to survive in spite of all those odds, imagine what could happen if we continue to make progress on eliminating some of those obstacles. And so the one thing I would say is that very often I hear this within the Latino community, I hear this about the work between the communities. You know, Latinos don't help each other, we tear each other down. If we were just like the African American community or the Asian community. I think that we need to challenge those notions, because why is it that our communities are expected to get perfectly along when others are not? And that is the standard of measure about whether we are effective or not. How many of you have heard, who's the leader of your community? Who represents Latinos? Who, you know, and that I think just completely undermines the fact that we are multi-layered, multi-dimensional leadership at all kinds of different levels, right? So I think we need to challenge that notion. But at the same time, it's important to acknowledge that when our houses are under fire, and I think many of our communities are experiencing that, you're responding to crisis after crisis, and it's really hard to take a step back and figure out how do we collaborate across every single thing. But I would also say that it's important not to dismiss the fact that we are collaborating. We have a lot of we have ways to go to strengthen that, but practice makes perfect. And so I want to make sure that we don't ignore those things, and that we use those as the stepping stones that allow us to learn what worked and what didn't. And there's some very specific things, even very recently, the collaboration among civil rights organizations, including my colleagues here with the National Urban League, to actually achieve great success in education under the Elementary and Secondary Authorization Act, to make sure that there were accountability measures and standards that would serve our communities well, even though we faced opposition for many quarters. But we stood strong to make sure that that went forward. I'm sorry, what's the time? No, but am I stopping? I don't know what your sign means. Okay, great. Sorry, I just want to make sure. I know we have a lot of speakers. The same is true in housing, particularly in the response to the foreclosure crisis, that so many of our communities lose wealth they've been struggling to build as a result of that, and coming together to try to support communities in that effort. There has been collaboration on criminal justice, and I think that that is the next arena where the practice we have had in previous issues, we can put it into, we can implement it there and take it a step further, because it's a big fight and one that really has a systemic way of holding us back in a lot of different areas, and that embodies the elements of inequality that are so pervasive in our society. So that presents a next opportunity ahead. Above all, I think that we are at a critical moment in our country's history, similar to previous moments we've gone through in the past. I think that there's a lot of anxiety about demographic change. There's a lot of anxiety about the economy. And in times like that, there are opportunistic politicians that come in and use the strategies that have for so long worked, divide and conquer. And so I think that this is a real opportunity for us to come together to paint a powerful and accurate story of us as a country, one in which every American, and I mean that broadly and in the civic sense, not necessarily in the immigration sense, can see themselves as part of what the aspiration of this country is to be, and a contribution to make that a reality. And one that challenges what has been building, which is this notion that we're going down the tubes, and it's because of the changes that our country is going through. We've heard this before. The same things have been said about Germans, Irish, you name it. And it has not come to be true. But I think right now there is a vacuum while this nihilistic perspective keeps building to stir anxiety and antagonism against our communities. The issue of immigration is used as a proxy to undermine, malign, and demonize Latinos, because 76% of Latinos are actually United States citizens. The memes of crime are used to demonize African Americans, although also Latinos. And terrorism is being used to demonize Muslim Americans. And so we need to challenge those notions. And I think that there's a lot of fellow Americans who are struggling to find a place to stand that rejects those politics of fear and hate. And it's a big burden, but in some ways, it's going to be our communities that are going to have to model that behavior for the rest of America, to model the America that we want to see, and we know it's possible. And we have taken steps together to do that. I think that the idea is, how do we make that permeate at all levels, not just national, but state, local, help our communities break bread together, get to know each other as individuals, organizations, and communities. Because the more we know each other, the less susceptible we are to the stereotypes and the fear that people try to get us to adopt in the way we approach and end up working with each other. So I look forward to the conversation. I know that there are a lot of specific examples, and I look forward to hear about your experiences as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Clarissa, for those comments and emphasizing the fact that we're diverse communities, right? And that despite our diversity, we all can still continue to work together. She talked about housing and education as a place that we have worked together, and then moving forward with criminal justice. And the fact that we as Americans must fight against the attempt to demonize people of color because of the browning of America, which America is trying to be afraid of. But we know that we are the ones that can make sure that America lives up to its ideals. Thank you, Clarissa. Now we're going to move on to Donald Cravens, who's Executive Director of the Washington Bureau of the National Urban League, which is I would say, in many respects, the equivalent of National Council La Raza in terms of one of the more progressive national organizations in our community. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Houston. Good afternoon. It is such an honor to be with you. Congressman Johnson, thank you so much for your leadership. Thank you so much for convening this panel. What a timely subject to have it on. So congratulations, and thank you and your staff for doing this. I want to also I'm just awestruck with the panel I'm sitting on today with these black and brown brothers and sisters of mine who are going to talk about so many important issues that they know so much more about than I do. But I'm going to try to talk to you a little bit today about voting. Before I do that, I want to just say I'm here today on behalf of the National Urban League and our 88 affiliates and the millions of men and women that we serve each and every day in urban America. And even though the Urban League was formed in 1910 because African Americans were leaving the Jim Crow South, moving to Northern America and looking for jobs and housing and education and felt like they needed some help, once the demographics of this country changed, I'm proud to say the National Urban League changed itself as well. And so now, although we still are centered on the plights of African Americans all over the country, if you live in an urban part of our country and you happen to be Latino, we want you to come to the Urban League if you need some help. If you need some housing counseling or some after-school help for your children, the Urban League will not turn you away because you might be a little bit darker than someone else. And so much have we begun to serve our black and brown, our brown brothers and sisters, that we even now track the numbers that affect the Latino community in America. And I'm happy to say, if you look at our State of Black America, you're gonna hear, if you go to any Urban League event this week, you're gonna hear about our 40th edition of the State of Black America. And in our State of Black America, not only do we track numbers that affect African Americans as it relates to health and education and the economy, we track the numbers as it relates to Hispanic brothers and sisters as well. We also track the unemployment numbers that affect Black Americans and Latinos living in America. And so we're very proud of that, and we had to do that because we are servicing that many African American and Latino brothers and sisters at our affiliate. So I'm proud to be here to do that today and to talk about that today. But check out our State of Black America. I'm going to talk about voting. And every panel I've been to so far this year, we've had a debate between generations or between philosophies on whether or not voting makes sense. And I'm sure our brothers and sisters at the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, they would have the same discussion, whether or not people think that voting is really important. I won't get into that in this panel, because that's not what this panel is about. However, free of charge, after this panel, I'm happy with Dr. Houston's mom, who I'm sure would love to help me explain to people, especially African Americans, why voting is important. See me after this, and I'd be happy to have that discussion with you. And if you're Latino, and you got questions on why voting is important, I'm sure my good friend Ben from Mi Familia Vota would love to sit down and talk to you and tell you why it's important for you to not only vote in this next presidential and congressional election, but why it's important to vote in all the elections. But I'm not here to talk to you about that. I want to talk to you about what's going on in the world of voting rights. Since 2013, when the Supreme Court declared parts of the Voting Rights Act unconstitutional, what we have found is that over 20 states have begun to enact voter suppression type laws. The same types of laws that we as African Americans saw during this thing that no one ever talks about, Reconstruction, where African Americans went from having voting power and United States senators and United States congressmen and governors in the great state of my home, Louisiana, to having no voting power whatsoever. We are starting to see a repeat of those same actions in at least 20 states, and coincidentally, they occurred immediately after the Supreme Court declared the Voting Rights Act unconstitutional, the pre-clearance part, the part that says before a jurisdiction can change polling places or early voting times or the opening of polls, you got to go to the Justice Department, right? That was done for a reason. We fought for those protections, but those protections don't exist. And we are headed into the first election in over 50 years that African American and Latino voters will not have the protections of the Voting Rights Act. So if it doesn't matter, why would 20 states try to change those laws immediately after it was declared unconstitutional? States like Alabama, Arizona. Now I'm gonna stop right there. What does Alabama, and I'm a Southern boy, have in common with Arizona?
Speak.
Southern, Southwest, different people, different look, different climate, different football attitudes. They have nothing in common except one thing. They both have large minority populations. And what you saw in Arizona were voting lines. You remember during the presidential primary, we saw hours and hours of brown voters standing in line, trying to cast their vote in the presidential primaries. In Alabama, you saw the state say, the budget cuts, so we got to cut the budget so much, Congressman, we got to start shutting down departments of motor vehicles. But we're going to only shut them down in the blackest of counties, and we're going to enact a new voter ID law. So you got to go get an ID. Can't go to DMV because we just shut yours down. And ladies and gentlemen, this is happening. And even though there's been lawsuits that have been filed to stop this, this election is going to take place in this America, and there will be no Voting Rights Act protections. And so when we talk about working together, we have got to work together in these next couple of months to make sure that we get past this election cycle. Local jurisdictions are going to be changing voting places. They're going to be changing times to vote. We have got to be ever vigilant. We've got to stay on top of things, and we've got to make sure that our people know where they need to go. They need to go early vote so that if a polling place is changed on election day, it's okay, I already voted. We have to pay attention to this because states like Indiana and Kansas and Mississippi and Nebraska, New Hampshire, Ohio, this one got me. Rhode Island. I was like, why would Rhode Island have a voter restriction law? This is a northeastern state, should be very progressive. There ain't that many colored folks in Rhode Island. Why would they even do that? Because what I was taught by my staff was Rhode Island is 12% Latino. And when you add that 12% to the 6% African American, you got a state that's almost a quarter minority. And so if you were trying to change some elections, or make it just a little bit harder to elect some people, or to defeat someone, maybe you enact a new voter ID law. Make it just a little bit extra hard for somebody to go out and vote. South Carolina, Tennessee, Texas, Virginia, and Wisconsin. So although I'm going to leave on a somewhat sour note in this segment, we are going to come back later and talk about all the great things we've done together and why we can continue doing some great things. But it is imperative that right now we pay attention and we come together as a community on these voting rights issues. They are affecting our community, they're being put in place for a reason, and we got to wake up and do something about it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Donald, for emphasizing the importance of voting, but also going there. You did give us a little history lesson. And so we needed that. When you look at Reconstruction, that's a great time to look at because African Americans had all the rights, right? They had land, they had money, they had their own jobs, they were able to vote, they were elected officials, and just by taking the voting rights away, right?
And the Supreme Court started.
Exactly, little by little. And then eventually Plessy versus Ferguson in 1896, then all of a sudden our status was changed. And most people don't realize that your status can be changed. And people don't embrace that fact, and we see that happening right now. Thank you for sharing those statistics and the importance that we have to go out and tell this new generation, and we even got to get the older generation up and to the polls to make sure that we have adequate representation and the right representation in our government, and that we make our voices heard in our government. Thank you very much, Donald. Next, we're going to have Hernando Viveros Cabezas, who's going to bring a unique perspective because he's from the Afro-Colombian Global Initiative, and we're looking at the Pan-African, Pan-Latino part of this conversation in terms of global affairs, and he's probably going to specifically talk about Colombia and Afro-Latino issues there, but we're excited to have him as a panelist as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. William. I want to start in Witi Binafi. Muy buenas tardes. Good afternoon, everyone. And I want to start and say thank you to the Congressman Han Johnson for opening this panel and the opportunity. And I say that like a brother, like a friend, and like Afro-Colombians, you support a lot of issues. And we advance with everything you do in Colombia, also for the peace process, and also the Black Congressional Caucus members. I just want to say and recognize a lot of friends, a lot of brothers, and trying to describe the Afro-Latino or African diaspora. My brother from Colombia, Jefferson Asprilla, Divalicet Murillo, are Afro-Colombian journalists. And we are here with John Clare, Afro-Cuban, and we had right here my mentor and the fighter for social justice, Roland Roebuck, and Dr. Tukufu Suberi, and all my friends are here. I want to start in for the Afro-Latinos and international perspective. I want to read my presentation. Forgive me if I say something incorrectly, but I want to follow the rules. And the International Decade for People of African Descent, 2015-2024, is a declaration by the United Nations. And we must remember that people of African descent are among those most affected by the racism. Too often they face denial of basic rights, such as access to quality health, service, and education. This is the message from the Ban Ki-moon, is the United Nations General Secretary. And also, in the proclamation of this decade, the international community is recognizing that people of African descent represent a distinct group whose human rights must be promoted and protected. Around 200 million people identify themselves as being of African descent living in the Americas. Many millions more live in other parts of the world, outside of the African continent. The resolution 68 plus 237 is about recognition, justice, and development for the African descendant around the world. The objective of the UN Decade for People of African Descent is promote respect, protection, and fulfillment of human rights and fundamental freedoms by people of African descent as recognized in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Promote a greater knowledge of and respect for diverse heritage, culture, and contribution of people of African descent to development of societies. Adopt and strengthen national, regional, and international legal frameworks according to the Durban Declaration and Program of Action, and the International Convention of Elimination of all forms of racial discrimination, and to ensure their full and effective implementation. What we know about the African descendant in the Americas, when we're talking about Brazil, Brazil has 51% of black population, is over 100 million of black people there and speaking Portuguese. And when we're talking about Colombia, in the census data, we have almost 10% of the people is black in Colombian. But we had unrepresentation about 25% of the total population in Colombia. It's almost 12 million. And Colombia is considered the country with major or higher black population speaking Spanish around the world. Talking about Honduras, or El Salvador, or Nicaragua, or Peru. And I have some way forward for future recognition, justice, development, and sustainability. And we have 3 recommendations. One is urgently address the underrepresentation of Afro-Latinos in position of power. We had in Colombia just one black minister in the government. Is Mr. Luis Gilberto Murillo, the Minister of Environmental and Development. The other recommendation we had is aggressively work forward Pan-African solidarity by forming coalitions among continental Africans, the African Union, with Africans in the diaspora residing in Latin America and the Caribbean, US, Canada, Europe, and Asia. Develop a common agenda with respect to human and civil rights, voting rights, equitable development, land rights, and non-discriminatory access to education, healthcare, employment, and reparation for slavery. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hernando, for sharing those comments about the status of people of African descent in the Americas. And his whole point was that people of African descent in other countries are experiencing challenges, and we want to emphasize, his organization wants to emphasize that people of African descent need to be in positions of power in the countries in Central and South America. They also want to form coalitions abroad and also promote a common agenda with other people of African descent. Thank you so much for sharing those comments. Next, we have Gesner Josue Parea, who is Director of Communications at the Afro-Latino Forum, who is also going to talk about Afro-Latino identity and issues related to the Afro-Latino community. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ramon, and thank you, Congressman Johnson, for hosting this. It's very important that we're hosting this. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm very honored equally to be here with everyone. I know Hernando and I are both Colombian, and we've been at many events together, so it's always funny when I'm like, oh, Hernando's gonna be there. All right, I feel more calm. Not that I wouldn't be calm with everyone else, I'm just saying. I also know Carol from our work in New York. I come representing the Afro-Latino Forum. The Afro-Latino Forum is a nonprofit organization based out of New York that has some national spread, but not much. And we focus on raising the awareness of people who are Latino or Latinas and who are of African descent. And so what does that mean? And what does that mean? Because when we talk about blackness, we understand it in different contexts and in different ways. So I was having a conversation with a friend of mine. I live in Brooklyn. And last few weeks ago was the West Indian Day Parade. Was that Monday? I forgot the day. What was Labor Day? Was this past Monday? Yes, okay. So that's, if you're from New York, that's the big West Indian Day Parade. And so we were talking about it. And it's funny because he said, well, there are a lot of black people, and then there were also a lot of Panamanians, right? So he created this weird dichotomy between what it was meant to be black and what is meant to be Panamanian, right? And I think that we understand blackness in different ways, but what I want to challenge everyone here is that we start broadening our definition and understanding of what blackness means, right? There is a context where blackness means African American, and there is a context where blackness means someone who speaks English and who is black. That's true. But there's also a growing number of people who are black who speak many different languages other than English. And that's part of the population that I talk about, that some others will talk about, this Afro-Latino, African Latino, Black Latino population. There are many different terms that have come up with it, and have come up to describe us, is this idea to challenge two notions, to challenge this term of black, right? Black is a broader term, is not only mutually owned by the African American community, while it is owned in this context, yes, right? In United States context, it is owned, but blackness should be an expansive term that we should be able to include others who are also black. And just because they don't speak English, right? I said this a statement that I spoke at the Schomburg Center recently, and Arturo Alfonso Schomburg, who has one of the largest research centers in black culture, as most of you should know, is a Puerto Rican brother, right? He was a Puerto Rican brother who devoted his life to collecting black culture from all over the world, right? From all over the world. And it's important to recognize that. Why? Because even then, and that was early 1900s, and people who know, like Dr. Roebuck, who's in the back, he could tell you that the story of Schomburg is really involved in what was then Black Harlem and Black America, which was mixed between people who spoke Spanish, people who spoke like Creole. No, but I'm thinking of the language in India, because there were a lot of Indians that were there. There was the black understanding of Harlem during the early 1900s was so large that it's later is where we have shrunk that definition to be a much smaller definition, to say black is only this and black cannot be that. And at the same time, I want to challenge the notion of this idea of brown. What does it mean to be brown? What does that mean? Because by doing that, we're creating we're creating a divisive language to say, well, you know, because my name was very complicated, my name is always very complicated. Gessner Josue Perea. Gessner is a Welsh name, it's in German spelling. Don't ask me why, I have no Welsh or German in my background. Josue is Latino, is Joshua in Spanish, and then Perea is just whatever. Anyway, the point is that just because I am Latino doesn't necessarily mean I am brown. But that's how sometimes that discussion gets labeled. Sometimes the discussion gets labeled well, if you're not African American, then you're brown. But as some sociologists call it, my street level race, the way that people interact and deal with me as a human being, is not however brown person is treated. Because when I go down the street, there's nowhere they're like, oh wait, you're brown because you speak Spanish. No one knows that. So I just mentioned that because I think that we have to realize that we have more in common than we have separate. There's a lot more commonality than what we have. And there's a greater knowledge and a greater awareness of this importance of these hybrid, what I'm going to call it like that, hybrid populations such as the Afro-Latino population. And the importance of that population in civil rights work in the past and in the present. Many people know about the Black Panthers, right? We know about the Black Panthers. Right? I'm assuming, right? I mean, I didn't get it. I thought people were going to be excited. The Black Panthers are a good group, right? But the Black Panthers have formed an Afro-Latino group called the Young Lords, right? That's what I'm talking about, sister. The Young Lords. Many people don't know that the Young Lords were inspired by the Black Panthers. And then some people don't know that the Young Lords were an Afro-Latino organization. That was a group of black brothers and sisters who were Latino who said, you know what? We're taking inspiration from what the African American community is doing, and we're going to do that in our own communities. And in East Harlem, they collected trash when the city didn't want to collect trash. They gave out food when the city didn't want to give out food to people who were poor. They helped kids get to school and all of these things. So there's been a long story of coalition, and I like what Dr. Clarissa said at the beginning, that we already have been working together. So we have to also challenge the notion that we are not working together and that we have to work together. What we should say is, what's the next area that we should work together in? What is the next thing that we should tackle? One of the things that's important for us, and one of the things that I specifically want to mention, as I told Alan and Dr. Ramona, especially in front of the representative, is that one of the current issues that affects us as Latinos and that should also interest African American community is the Census Bureau removing a racial category for Latinos. So I don't know if people are aware that the Census Bureau is moving to a policy where they would put Hispanics or Latino as a racial category instead of an ethnicity. And yes, we can say, and I'm with everyone who says, race is just a made-up construct and blah, blah. I know that, that's true. However, the Census Bureau and all those stats are used for appropriation of resources in our communities. So while I theoretically agree with that sentiment that ethnicity is made up and race is made up, I agree with you. We have to realistically know that what it's used for. And what that's used for is for appropriation of resources. And by taking away the choice of myself or Hernando or anyone else here to say, hey, I want to select that I'm both Latino and African and Black, right? And African and whatever the whole line says, we're erasing a population that has long history in this country. There are many, not only because of the new Netflix show that people are realizing that, oh, a lot of Latinos invented hip hop. I didn't know that, right? Because it was in the context of the Bronx, and the Bronx is a very Afro-Latino community, a very Afro-Latino group. But in many different endeavors, in the Selma movement, and something that sometimes people don't know, some people from a lot of the Latinos who went down to Selma to march were Afro-Latinos. And we have stories where some of them were soldiers who went and fought and then felt when they came back that they were treated as unequally as everyone else, and they felt that they had to work out. So what I want to challenge is I want to make sure that we do two things. I want to make sure that we understand that the African American and Latino communities are broad, and that to define them in small terms, such as like, well, the Black community is this, and that's the brown community, we're not helping each other. We should always broaden that. Number two, I want to make sure that we understand that it is important, and it is very important for us to see that the undercounting of Black folk, whether we speak Spanish or English, affects all Black folk, whether we speak Spanish or English. And I also think that it's important to recognize that we have been working together, that the African American and Latino communities have been working together for a very long time, even before. Schaumburg was 1900s, and there was a long coalition of people there, and I want to make sure that we think of that, and I'm looking forward to the rest of what everyone has to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Josue, emphasizing the idea that words do matter and labels do matter and identity does matter in terms of who is Black and who is brown, and really expanding our concept of how we define ourselves, as we were going back to how we define ourselves and how we define each other in order to be more inclusive. Thank you very much for that discussion and those points. Next, we'll have Alejandra Castillo, who is the National Director of the U.S. Department of Commerce, MBDA, Minority Business Development Agency. We're so happy to have her here as one of our civil servants and in government, and we look forward to hearing what you have to say about the growth of Black and brown businesses, if I can use that word.
Absolutely. So I always like to, good afternoon. I always like to survey the audience. So how many of you are business owners, perchance? How many of you would like to start a business? Excellent. So I'm going to add another color to this discussion, and that's green. We forget at times that Martin Luther King actually was advocating for civil rights as well as economic rights. Yeah. And that formula is more important today than ever before. When you look at the data, and you look at, even when you look at minority-owned businesses, which the good news is we have grown since 2007, almost 39% of growth in terms of the number. Now let's be very careful in terms of the number of businesses. But the key question we really need to ask ourselves, are they growing in size and scale? Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Are they growing in terms of their revenue, in terms of the jobs that they're created? If every minority-owned company created one more job, employed one more person, the unemployment rate in our communities would go down significantly. So the key question here is, and again, I'm so happy that there's so many New Yorkers here. I'm a New Yorker, and for better or for worse, you know what that means. However, I am a public servant, so I am at my best behavior. Nonetheless, there are some facts that are irrefutable. Here's one thing, and I'm so happy that I'm sharing this panel with Clarissa. I agree with you 100%. We need to change the story. We need to change the narrative. Indeed, when you start with the worst of the statistics, who wants to touch that? Right? But then there are amazing data that we need to start moving forward to change that narrative. And that narrative has to include that in addition to civil rights, we are also fighting for economic opportunities. Don, I can't agree with you more on the voting rights. I'm a lawyer, absolutely. This election is going to be critical on so many fronts, and we have to pay attention to the Supreme Court. Right? What's going to happen? The next president choosing anywhere between one, we know at least 1 to 3 Supreme Court justices. And what does that say when we talk about decisions that are coming up through the Supreme Court? Hernando, I have traveled Latin America. My parents are Dominican, so that's a different basket. And I'll talk about that in a minute. But we have to also be very cognizant that Latinos, in many ways, we started out with our African heritage. Because by the time the population that survived the first wave of Spaniards or others that came to Latin America, the natives had been pretty much decimated, unfortunately. But it is our African roots that keep us true. And if you look at the Latino culture and you compare it, you'd see so many similarities. As a Caribbean, I go to New Orleans and I feel like home. Going to New Orleans to me is the food, the culture, the music, the people. So we walk together. We've always walked together. But the diaspora is also a very important, plays a very important role, and I'm going to just take a minute. As I said, my parents are Dominican. I grew up in the Dominican Republic, and for personal reasons, I was, until recently, boycotting it. Because I could not understand, as Clarissa said, we challenge our ideals and we think that we are not living up to our ideals, but when we go outside of the US, you understand that we have such an amazing country. So it was hard for me to reconcile what was happening in the Dominican Republic with our brothers and sisters from Haiti. Hahowever, I believe that the diaspora is the answer. Because we have our American ideals, the Dominican and Haitian diaspora can actually bring some solutions to that island, and I'm hopeful. Now let me pivot again to the diaspora as it relates to the economics of it. 100 million Afro-Brazilians, what a market. What a market to sell to. When we look at minority-owned firms, we are looking at them for access to capital, which remains the #1 problem. You know, I was reading the papers today and was watching what's happening to Wells Fargo, and I said, wow, if they had only lent a little bit of that money. I'll leave it at that. Access to contracts. Federal government spends $500 billion in goods and services. That's only the federal government. I'm not talking about the private sector. How much of that are minority-owned companies having access to that? In the federal space, we have policies to ensure that that happens, but what's happening in the private sector space? And then access to markets. 95% of the world's consumers live outside of the United States. And guess what? When you go as a minority-owned firm, an African American owned firm or a Latino owned firm together going to a market like Brazil, Colombia, the Dominican Republic, anywhere in Africa, what an amazing opportunity because people do business with people they know and they trust. Absolutely. We have a unique advantage to do that. So I'm going to leave it there, but I have to remind you, when we have these conversations about black and brown, we have to have them together and then add the green. Okay? Thank you.
Thank you, Alejandra, for sharing those important remarks about the importance of green. in Black-Brown relations. So thank you very much. Next, we'll move on to Carol Frazier Hainsworth, who is an entrepreneur herself. So we're delighted to have her and talking about entrepreneurship, money, access to capital, and really following up with some of Alejandra's remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. I would like to start by thanking the Congressman Johnson. I had the pleasure to own a home in your district for over 10 years, and you have been a relentless leader, so thank you for your work in our community. I also want to take an opportunity to thank each one of the audience members for spending the time with us, because the fact that you are here means that you care and means that you are the influencer that is going to go out and create this bridge that we need in our communities. And I want to also say that it is truly an honor to be on this panel with each and every one of my fellow panelists, as each and every one of you are individuals that I have followed, and you are the thought leaders of our nation. So thank you so much for the work that you do and for your commitment. And I would also like to acknowledge Julio Witty Guevara, who I have the pleasure to call friend, and he is the Director of Latin American Affairs here with the Mayor of DC. So thank you, Julio, for joining us. Now, why is this conversation so important to me, and essentially and to our nation, and to me, why have I taken it personally throughout my entire life? Well, I was born in Honduras. I am a US citizen. I am a mother. I am a friend. I am an entrepreneur. And in each one of these scenarios, I look at what is happening with our country on an ongoing basis. I also look at the elections that are coming, and I look at civil rights, and I think of, since it's truly front and center, and I think of what are the three issues that I think are most pressing as I look at the situation. And I think of education, I think of police brutality, and then I think about economic empowerment. I would like to define economic empowerment as I understand it, and as I would like for you to know that is as our community understands it. Economic empowerment is not just jobs. Economic empowerment is the contributions that we make as Latinos and as African Americans in this country. And I'm going to dig a little deeper in there. Latinos opened 86% of all new businesses created in the United States between 2007 and 2012. But they lagged in comparison to others as it pertained to revenue, with an average of 155,000 in 2012 Latinos versus others 573,000. And this just was reported by CNN Money, February 2016, so this is recent. And what did that also say? That America is missing out on 1.4 trillion Latino business opportunities. And you would wonder why. Why is this a miss, and why is the situation? The study also said that when they interviewed the people, a lot of people said, what keeps my business from being able to grow is the fact that I don't have access to capital to grow my business the way that I would like to. So that's Latinos. Now, African Americans. While other sectors seem to be lower as it pertains to entrepreneurship, not African Americans. And the reasoning for it, while not always as positive as we would like for it to be, is almost twice that of whites when it comes to unemployment. And the article that I read in Fortune magazine, dated August 3rd, 2016, said it was because African Americans start businesses because we are need-based business owners. But the bottom line is that 40% of businesses are owned by Asians, Blacks, and Latinos. And the reason why I share with you these statistics is because I want this conversation to be grounded in that. In the fact that together, if we were able to capitalize on those numbers and the fact that we were already doing, we're not in the process of, and that's why I said I want to redefine the narrative of economic empowerment. We are not just seeking for jobs, we are the small businesses that are providing the employment in this nation. And as you know, as a nation, we're pretty powerful, so also in the world. So what is my invitation to all of us today is that we do what the remarkable Donald Cravens has done with his life, which is something I have the pleasure to know his family for many years. His sister is a friend for over 20 years and a sorority sister. And their family is, I've been so proud since I heard him speak, because their family is proof to me of what happens when we take accountability for what can happen. All I could say is the apple did not fall too far away from the tree here. I have the pleasure to know his father. And it shows us of what it is, and it demonstrates to us that we do have to take over the narrative. We can, and we already are doing it. And it is for that reason that in July of 2016, just a little while ago, I launched an initiative named Black in the World. And it came out of pure frustration, to be honest with you. For over 8 years, I worked with Turner Broadcasting with CNN, and I used to travel all over the world, and I would see how people would be surprised. Every time I said, I'm from Honduras, and they heard me speaking Spanish, they would be surprised. So as I started to travel, I started to use my iPhone, and I started to interview amazing individuals that were of color all over the world. And I started to document these stories, and then I found out that there wasn't an archive. And then I also happened to come from one of those families where my mother would always ask me, what will you do? I heard the problem, but what will you do? So I try to utilize my background in media, after also having the pleasure to have worked with The Economist and Meredith Corporation and many other. I said, I'm going to use the information I have to be able to create this platform. So I invite you all to visit blackintheworld.net. And also use the hashtag Black in the World, because that is an opportunity for us to see our contributions and accomplishments of Afro-Latinos, of Blacks, so that we could see that we are already doing this. And it's just time for us to realize that the person that we've been waiting for a long time to come and solve the issues in our communities and in our nation, that person is us.
Thank you very much, Carol, for those comments and emphasizing the importance of entrepreneurship in our communities and the fact that we need to grow our businesses in order to impact even more people. I heard Reverend Jackson say some years ago, he asked, who do we think is the biggest employer of Black America? And everybody said it was government. And in actuality, the statistics show that it's actually other Black-owned businesses. And so going back to the earlier point, we all need to try to grow our businesses, at least one other person, right? And we can really impact our communities. And that question that you asked, what will you do? What your mother asked you, we all need to ask ourselves that question, what will I do? What will I do following this forum and taking this information on? So thank you very much for those comments. And next we'll have Kevin Gilbert, who's on the executive committee of the National Education Foundation. And we're excited to have someone here in the field of education, because we know how important it is in our communities in order to lift our status in various aspects. It has to do with education and being literate about a wealth of issues: voting, entrepreneurship, financial literacy, political empowerment, and just a wealth of issues that we need to know. Thank you very much. Look forward to your comments.
Thank you, Madam Moderator, and thank you, Congressman Johnson, for this opportunity, and thank you to all of you for being in attendance today. Yes, I am here on behalf of Lily Eskelsen Garcia, the President of the National Education Association, as well as more than 3 million members of the NEA, to talk to you about how the Black and brown communities can work together to create more access and opportunity for our children in education. I'm sitting here very passionately because I'm the father of 2 sons. One is a 9th grader and the other one is a 5th grader. And as you heard the panelists talk about, there was one consistent thing that I think each and every one of them mentioned, and that's education. Education, education, education. Education is the gateway to access and opportunity. But the reality for many of our brown and Black kids is they attend schools that don't receive necessarily the amount of funding that they need to receive. They attend schools every day that has a large number of law enforcement officials either working as SROs or community officers within their schools.
They operate in schools sometimes where they are disproportionately disciplined more harshly and severely than the other students that they attend school with. They are attending schools where we look at the numbers and disproportionately the dropout rates have increased for our black and brown students. And so I'm here today to talk about how we can work together and why it is important that we work together on behalf of our students of color. If there's one institution, if there's one thing that we need to really get right, it's the education system. Our families across this country, they only have one chance to get that right for their students. And we have to work together to make sure that becomes a reality for all of our students. There are several areas and several ways that we can do this. We look around and you've heard of the school to prison pipeline. That's the process of pushing out our students and getting them involved or interacting with our criminal justice system. Generally, that is practiced by some of the disproportionality in terms of the policies and practices where minor offenses are sending our students out of the classroom. This is an area where we can work with communities. The National Education Association, for example, just put out a policy statement which is going to guide our members and our locals to help with communities so that we can stop and dismantle the school to prison pipeline that affects many of our students, many of our black and brown students. There's opportunities around English language learners and making sure that our schools are able to support them as well as provide them all the needs that they need so they can be successful in school. We work diligently, especially with many of our brothers and sisters around other partnerships that want to look at making sure that all of our students have access and opportunity, and that includes that they can be able to be successful in school from where they come from and not being forced into a situation that makes it harder for them. And so we ramp up our work around making sure that those opportunities are available for our students. We talk about access and opportunity, but the reality is for many of our students of color and some of our schools, they don't have the same access to quality supplies, resources, books, and things that many others have. For example, I work in a suburban school district. Our school district has a laptop computer for all of our students. Our students have high-tech technology bandwidth within our schools so that they can have Wi-Fi. The sad reality, though, is in the Mississippi Delta, where a lot of black students operate, and in many of the schools on the coast where we have a large Hispanic population, those schools are so old because they can't even pass a millage to raise the money to build a better school that they can support Wi-Fi, that those students don't have that access and opportunity, which is putting what is making it harder for our students to be successful. But there is an opportunity we see around the recently passed the Every Student Succeeds Act. Now, we do understand that there's some caution there because as community of color, we know what happens when state and local control has taken over education. It has not been well for our communities. But this is an opportunity that we have worked with our locals to say, listen, we need to take the leadership in working with our communities of color so that we can make sure that they are receiving everything that they're supposed to do, that we can get it right this time, and we can force our states and our locals to provide those opportunities. You know, if we do not work together on behalf of our students, that's our future. And if there's one area that I believe both of our communities can find commonality in, it is finding that commonality and breaking down the structures and the practices that are set out to divide us and breaking down those policies and practices that are pushing our students out as well as denying them access and opportunity. And so I look forward to the conversation as we talk about ways to work together because it's time for us to be a coalition of the willing for the babies. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kevin, for your comments concerning education and the challenges that we have in our current public school system, K through 12. And of course, we'll be talking about higher education in our question and answer. So Congressman Johnson specifically asked that we be short, right? So that we could have a great discussion, because we want to open it up so that we can really start talking about solutions. Our panelists here highlighted some of the challenges in their areas, their respective fields, but we really want to talk about how can we come together as communities and what are the issues and challenges we're dealing with on the local and national levels. what are the solutions that we see, what are the best practices that we see in our communities, so that we can really create some synergy between the African American and Latino communities. We pretty much highlighted many of the challenges, but now this next discussion is about solutions. So with that being said, we want to open it up for question answer. There is a person on staff who will be having a mic and coming around. We'd like you to speak in the mic in order that we can get it recorded, your voice recorded. We also want to ask you not to be up there pontificating and talking a long time, because we want a lot of people to be able to add to the discussion. So please respect time. If you want your question asked to a specific person, please say the specific person you like, and we'd also like the panelists to be succinct as well. Okay, go ahead. Could you all line up in the middle, please, so that it'll be a little bit easier and we can go a little quicker? Thank you.
Yes, good afternoon. This question is for Mr. Gilbert. I'll be brief in case you don't have context, because this is a Georgia question, but my question is about Opportunity School District. So I'll just park it there.
Okay. So thank you for your question. For many of you who don't know, what we've seen around the country is where we have what we call priority schools, or schools that are being considered failing based on things. States are trying to combine them and working under one particular system. And so I think with the Opportunity School District, is something similar to what happened in New Orleans, something similar that's what's going on in Mississippi. I don't know the context in terms of whether charter schools are part of that or not. But what we're seeing is most of those schools that are on these lists, and most of these schools that are being grouped together, are community of color schools, schools where we have large black and brown students involved in them. And some of the concerns around that is that those schools are going to be seeing more cuts in terms of funding. They're going to see, many of them are going to see decreases in terms of some of the curriculum offerings that they have. And there is some question on whether or not that is the way to go to bridge academic standards so those schools can be successful. And so many organizations are working to. The one thing I want to say about it, if we are in this to try to make sure that our students are going to be successful, let's make sure that the foundation piece, or the thing that people are presenting with us, is going to do just that. And there is some question on whether or not Opportunity School Districts or Recovery School Districts are the answer.
Thank you very much.
Okay, my name is Roland Roback, and I want to say thanks to the two panelists that mentioned my name, which means that the work that I do in advocacy throughout the hemisphere has been impacting. So thank you, both of you. My question and issue is the following. I'm encouraging the National Council of La Raza to continue that initiative on addressing issues related to the Afro-Latino community, because many years ago you used to do that. And presently I'm not aware if Afro-Latino issues is a priority within the organization. Number two, I'm encouraging the Black Caucus to put pressure upon Latin American countries that exercise a great level of racism, but they listen to the Black Caucus when they exert pressure. And the last point is that in order for the Afro-American community in the United States to communicate with the millions of Afro-Latinos throughout the hemisphere, we need to change our attitude with respect to language.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay, language acquisition is extremely important in order to communicate with our brothers and sisters in Central and South America. And lastly, I'm interested if in the future, when we organize these panels, we could get the perspective of Africans from the continent, so we could get an idea as to how they perceive this notion of Afro-Americanness and Afro-Latinoness. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you. So, Donald, why don't you address National Council of La Raza first, and then any of the other, panelists who want to address the issues that he raised. Excuse me, Clarissa. Excuse me.
Oh, I didn't think I heard a question. I heard more like 5 directives. But what my comment would be is that at NCLR, we don't necessarily segment the populations we work on. In other words, we don't do policy based on Dominican Americans or Dominicans or Haitians or Colombians or whatever. We look at actually the most vulnerable segments of the Latino community in terms of our view on employment or schools or students and all of that. So I'm not sure that that's a satisfactory answer to you, but we don't have the bandwidth to actually look at the Latino community from every single segment of the population, the exact same way that actually, even though the majority of Latinos in the United States are Mexican or Mexican American, we don't apply a lens of this is how it affects Mexicans, right? We look at the whole Latino population, look at what are the biggest obstacles for upward mobility for folks that are being trapped in low-wage jobs, women, et cetera. So it's one way to address not having a huge staff that can be dedicated at each one of the segments of that very diverse community.
Thank you. Are there any other panelists that want to address any of the issues that he raised?
Can I just? I just think that, Rolando, I think that it is important for the issue, and I'm just going to respond a little bit to Clarissa using Rolando, is that what we want to make sure that happens, especially Afro-Latinos, is that certain issues that are explicitly affect Afro-Latinos are also on top of not only African American consciousness, but Latino consciousness. So for example, I'll give you a quick New York example. In New York, the stop and frisk policy that many people know about stopped about 80% of people who were black. And then when they segmented that, and so 80% of people who were what they call black and Latino. Then when you look at the Latino population, I think Latino was something like 40% or something like that out of the 80%. But out of the Latino population, it was over 70 or 80% of Latinos who were black who were stopped. So really, it really wasn't just every Latino. It was like, oh, you're black. I'm stopping you because you're black, and then because you check Latino. So what I think we just want to see is we just want to make sure that groups are considering that too, that there is a specific Afro-Latino experience that sometimes is not highlighted, and that sometimes is like lowered, and it's like that's not as important. But it is important because that population grows. So even though the Census Bureau says it's only 1.3 million people, which is totally not true, that experience for Afro-Latinos is often a more marginalized experience even within the Latino community. And then sometimes that's why, for example, Panamanians would choose to engage with West Indians, quote unquote, because they're like, I'm more accepted there. Let me go there. So I think those are just the things that I think we just like to see. And I think from what I understand, what Orlando says, that there was a time when the Council of La Raza was bigger on that than what it sounds like now. So just to clarify that point, that's where I just think for us it's important to highlight the explicit experience of Afro-Latinos who are often criminalized and often incarcerated at higher rates than other Latino brothers and sisters, specifically because we're in a white supremacist country, and that's one of the issues that we suffer from that.
I want to be, I still want to respect his 4 questions, but we're going to have to get on to the other questions as well. But number 3 was on language and the issue of language in terms of broadening our communication. And then Congressman, if you choose to do this panel again, to be inclusive of the African people on the continent. So those were his recommendations. Thank you very much. Next question, please.
He's been given some directives because we are not sticking to the program, but I'm going to stick to the program. Good afternoon. I'm Dr. Carlos McGee. I am an educator. I sit on the board in Inglewood, California as the board president for our Unified School District, and we have probably about 76% of our population of students are Hispanic, Latino. One of the questions that I have, I write for children. I write for preschoolers. So I try and start the dialogue when they're very small so that we don't have to get way up here trying to have a conversation. But one of the things, and you can just ponder this, is that so many of the organizations that African Americans have created, there has been an inclusive agenda to bring in Latinos, to bring in all races. What I would like to see is an example of how African American children, African American parents, African Americans, period. I tried to join La Raza.
Could you get to your question, please?
My question is, how do we create an inclusive agenda starting at a very early age where some of the access that you now have that African Americans are included? United Negro College Fund, we accept Latino students, but try to apply to one of the Latino organizations. There is a lockdown just for the inclusion.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
So that's my question.
Thank you.
How do we,
So is that directed specifically toward National Council La Raza?
no, anybody that can answer that.
Okay, so her question is, how does the Latino community be more inclusive of the African American community? That's the question.
So I just wanted to say that that is one of those assumptions. When I finished college, I got a scholarship from Thurgood Marshall, and when I had clicked Black initially, but when in the second form they sent, I clicked Latino, and they kindly sent me a letter letting me know that that scholarship was for African Americans. So I just wanted to give you an example where it works both ways, because I was declined because I wasn't African American from a Thurgood Marshall scholarship.
Okay, go ahead.
Quickly,
Let's wait.
just a very quick. I do think that there is a lot of validity to your question, so I don't want to deny that. There is validity to your question, that I think that there's idea, and I think that's where sometimes as I was talking to a train worker on my way here, he was saying we're sometimes fighting for the scraps, right? So I think that sometimes what we have to, and I'm not giving an excuse, I don't understand all the policies. I know that in our organization we accept anyone, right? And even in the leadership or whatever, but it is, the reason for that is sometimes, from what I understand, is that we want to make sure that the students, and I'm going to use this is the only time I'm going to be exclusive to being Latino, right? We want to make sure that our students are getting benefits that sometimes they were not getting, that maybe, yes, there are African American organizations open, but other organizations really didn't open. So when there are a lot of scholarship funds, like there's a Hispanic scholarship that I remember applying to, I applied to that because, yes, I wasn't necessarily told I could apply for the other one. So
on the scholarship, I want more inclusion in the organization.
right. So, but what I'm saying, right. But what I'm saying overall is that I think that we have to, number one, change the way that we think in that exclusivity, that, why are people exclusive to that? I think we just have to work together on saying, look, we could work together on that, but if the funding comes from similar places.
Okay, so we get your point. So the issue, the solution to that is education, is being able to discuss with the leadership of these organizations and the membership of the organizations that we want you to be more inclusive of all people in these scholarships. We know that there are challenges with that, and I know you're not talking about just scholarships. You're talking about membership. You're talking about you're talking about other levels of inclusivity, but you were using scholarships as an example. But to your point, one of the solutions is being able to educate our leadership. So let's move on to the next question. Thank you. Go ahead.
You know what? I feel like I want to jump right in right here because the question that you raised and the issue that it's based upon are exactly what I wanted to provoke in having this dialogue between our two communities, which I think has been brilliantly, I've been brilliantly educated about the fact that there really is not two communities or two separate pockets of interests, but there are joint interests of our communities that we have reveled in and dealt in together for a long time. So it's not the thing like we've got to start working together. We're already working together. We just have to realize that we are together, that we do have joint interests, and that we've dealt with those out of our separate communities, but we've basically done them together. So once we realize that, we can start working even more together to bring more value to our joint struggle. So I'm glad that young lady asked the question, she left in frustration because I don't think she thought she was heard, but I sensed that she was heard. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thank you.
And yes, and these are some of the issues that prevent people from working together because they have one experience and then that all of a sudden keeps them away forever. You know, as a scholar.
I have to say, she did pose the question to me, and I wasn't about to answer. So I'm sad that she left before I could.
Yes, and you know, we have these, I mean, people always approach me about, how are you a Mexican American scholar? You're not Mexican American. That how do you legitimately be able to study Mexican American history? And so we all have these challenges, but we have to keep educating people. We're already working together, but we just have to keep on, keep at it. You know, we're a work in progress. So, comments, Alejandra?
I just wanted to jump in. When I took the position of national director, I held a meeting of stakeholders, U.S. Black Chamber, the U.S. Hispanic Chamber, the Asian American, Pacific American Chamber, and National Minority Supplier Development Council. It was an alphabet soup of all those stakeholders that deal with minority businesses, because there are a lot of them. And one of the things that I said is, look, we have a mentality of a zero-sum game. If you get something, that means I don't get something. And the reality in business, if you really want to talk business at the highest level of this great country, is that they all work together. It doesn't matter, they're Republican or Democrats, they're in one industry or another, they all work together. But we are relegated to this minor league play over here, and I'm a Dominican, so I have to use my baseball metaphors. And we're all relegated over here, and we're fighting. We're fighting while the big dollars are determined over here. Now, if we continue to have this conversation, we are cannibalizing ourselves. Our organizations are fighting for the same dollars from the same corporations, and they're trying all to survive. At the end of the day, they're all trying to survive. This is a concept that many people don't like to talk about, but maybe we do have to have some mergers and acquisitions in our own organizations, because we can't all survive at the same pace, which will then force us to represent a multitude of stakeholders. At the end of the day, we have to play this game differently. Because if we continue to do the same thing, guess what? Congressman, you will be hosting us again for the next 10 years, 20 years, until God gives you enough life, but we won't be moving the needle. So this is a mindset that we have to really change, and we have to change it right now, because let me also tell you a big reality, and Don knows this, I'm big on technology and innovation. There's a technological tsunami that's coming our way. And if you're concerned about 7% unemployment, 10% unemployment, think about 25, 30% in our communities. Because we're being left out of this technological revolution because we don't have the capital, because we don't have the contracts, because we don't have the markets, and so on and so forth. So either we're going to be forced to work together, truly, not just as independent organizations, but as one. And I really encourage you, this is a time, because mark my words, that technological tsunami will either bury you or you will ride the wave to success.
Thank you. So it's very important that we pay attention to how we play the game. That's basically what she's saying, so we can move from the minor leagues to the major leagues. Thank you very much, Alejandra. And I'd like to say these conversations are difficult to have, right? That's why, you know, sometimes we don't have them.
That's right.
So let's raise these critical issues, even though they may be a little uncomfortable. It's important that we talk about them. Next question.
Hi, my name is Monica Nunes Costa. I'm a small business owner. I own an auto repair in Rockville, Maryland. And my question, I would like to make one point, not only in Tennessee, but in Baltimore, there's one math book per class, so we don't have to go as far as Tennessee. I agree with the young lady who left in the sense of, you know, representation. I believe that Univision, Telemundo also needs to portray Black Latinos. I want to thank the brother who mentioned I'm Afro-Brazilian, so thank you. And my question is to Ms. Fraser, Carol Fraser. How do you see media portals like Univision, Telemundo when will blacks, we will be portrayed and see on soap operas and see, not that I see it, but I believe that representation is very important. So,
Thank you.
And is there a movement towards that?
Yes, so that is a great question. And the other business that I founded 5 years ago, Flourish and Bloom Entertainment, that is specifically the reason why I launched it. Because as a person who had been a member of the production team for CNN, I knew that I had the access to bring people of color on, and so that they could have an opportunity to advocate for our own issues. So in other words, we could see it in the studio that there was that void. And that is another reason where I mentioned I can't highlight enough accountability. The people that are in the newsrooms, the producers, they have to become accountable to themselves and go ahead and push for that. So I know with Turner Broadcasting, we have that pretty much covered. I have the pleasure to represent many attorneys that get off marches and then go on CNN. And so I like that, because I know that they're speaking, that's their truth for their community. And the same for Latinos. Now, I can say some of the other people that what she mentioned about partnerships, I think one of the things that affects us in media is that a lot of the people, when they join these organizations in a relevant position, they are afraid of speaking on behalf of their community, because there's that fear of, I'm the only black person, or I'm the only Latina. So I think that part of the problem that we have in media is that we don't have enough advocates. And when we have the right person in the right position, they're operating out of a position of fear, not of a position of empowerment. So until that doesn't change, that's why I really cannot highlight enough how it's really what we do with ourselves. Because sometimes we are getting the jobs. I don't like the victim role. We are getting the jobs. The question is, what do you do when you're in that seat?
Thank you. Thank you very much. Next question. And could you, anybody who wants to ask a question, please come over here and line up. We're going to try to, we want to get to all the questions.
Can I just add something on
Yes,
the medium?
yes.
The beauty of the color green is that it has some wonderful legs.
Could you put the mic up, please? Thank you.
I said the beauty of the color green is that it has some wonderful legs. And when you as a consumer are not pleased with what is being given to you as a product, you have the choice to move on. Technology is also giving us some great opportunities to have alternatives. And whether it's Univision, Telemundo, or others, I don't particularly ascribe to any of them, the product that they sell to us is also of a quality should be demanded.
Yep.
Because we go back to education. It's not just the portrayal, it's also the information that's being disseminated. But then you have to look at who owns it, right? Who owns it? And how are we supporting that product that at times is of mediocre quality? So the color green has some very amazing legs if you choose to go with it. But we also have to be not just consumers, obviously, we have to be entrepreneurs. But to think that our dollar has to be measured equally for every time we turn on that channel. So I also want to make sure that we are educating ourselves as consumers and as entrepreneurs, because we do live in a capitalistic society, and that's how things are voted, right? Going back to the vote. The dollar also is a vote.
Yes, go ahead, Esther.
She just reminded me of something for the sister who asked that question. There's an organization in Texas of these two young girls, Afro-Latino girls, who it's called Proyecto Más Color, Project More Color Project. What they're doing is they're actually petitioning to Univision and to Telemundo and to other Spanish networks all the time about putting more people of color on TV. So one of the ways to quote, one of the ways that green can work out is if you support them. They're very young. They're both college age. They've moved around the country to introduce themselves to different people. So Proyecto Más Color is a project that two sisters in Texas are working on, and they're specifically working on getting more people of color in Univision and in Telemundo.
So your green matters, whether it's the giving of your money as philanthropists, right?
Mm-hmm.
And to the causes that you support, the candidates that you believe represent your interest, and you have power in the green in withdrawing your money and not supporting those businesses who don't have your interest in mind. May we have the next question, please? And we're asking everybody, please be brief so we can get to all the questions. Thank you.
Buenas tardes, mi gentes.
Buenas tardes.
Good afternoon, brothers and sisters. My name is Gregory Deere. I'm an Afro-Latino activist from Virginia. First and foremost, I want to thank you for convening this panel because I'm extremely invested in the information that we're sharing today, as my father is Jamaican and my mother is from La República Dominicana. As an Afro-Latino activist with expertise in job development, fair housing research, and capacity building in low-income communities, I wanted to obviously draw attention to the shared statistics and the shared injustices that Blacks and Latinos face as a result of my study of the income inequality and unemployment index of the Urban League.
Could you be brief, please?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Okay, so Donald Cravings actually once told me that in order to make some significant change, you need to do it on a policy level. To do that, you need a unified voice. So I'm here to ask, what are the coalitions, you can name just 3, that collaborate and consolidate votes and efforts in job development and fair housing research?
Thank you very much for your question. Does anybody know of any 3 efforts that are working for voter registration or economic empowerment of the African American and Latino communities? Initiatives that are going on right now.
I can mention one in Long Island. There's the Long Island Empowerment Project. We work with them in Long Island, in New York. The Long Island Empowerment Project is focused on, I never know the size of Long Island. It's like Suffolk and Norfolk and one of those folk sides. And they work on a community that's overly Latino. So if you want to support this Long Island Empowerment Project, that's one that I know. And we did some work with them in New York. And that's what they're specifically doing. They're specifically trying to coalesce and work together on African American and Latino communities.
I just saw Congressman Cleaver before this session, and he said that he started an initiative called the BBC Black Brown Coalition, where he got the African American and Latino communities together in his district for them, because there were no Latino elected officials in his area. And so what he did, it was combine those 2 communities and said, hey, let's decide who's gonna run for both offices so we don't conflict. And therefore, they put one candidate up and everybody gets behind that candidate. And he said that one Latino that ran only lost by 16 votes. So they're gonna run him again, and he'll be the first elected official in that area. So that's one other example. Does any other Black Puerto Rican caucus in New York?
Okay. Now go ahead and say this, and I'm gonna be brief because I'm gonna make this my closing remarks because I may have to have another event I got to get to. But Brother Deere explained a void that is there. There are some examples locally, and it's good to hear statewide, local. My friends at La Raza and the Urban League and the NAACP, we do work together. The Black Caucus, the Hispanic Caucus, the Asian and Pacific American Caucus, we do work together on issues. But to get to your point, Brother Deere, we need to be more proactive in working together on the issues. We get together when there's a piece of legislation to support or to defeat, we do that. When one of ours is attacked, we get together and we try to work together, we do that. What I think we need to do is we need to sit down, and we call it at our office, we've been working on it, our civil rights grand bargain. We need to come together as a community and say, are there 3 or 4 or 5 things that we can work together, we can have a platform, and we can strategize and say we're gonna support this together. We're gonna support it in states like Georgia. Georgia is a state that all of a sudden is becoming a purple state.
Yes.
You've been hearing that, right? What has made Georgia purple? There's always been a lot of African Americans in Georgia because the Latino community has moved into Georgia and is a sizable portion of the population as well. Georgia is 31% African American and over 10% Latino. If I was a young politician in Georgia, I'd be sitting down with my Latino brothers and sisters saying, we need to talk. We need to come together and figure out we can get a statewide elected official here in Georgia. We can take over some of these municipalities outside of Atlanta. We'll take some, you guys take some. We got to start bargaining with one another, getting over our differences, finding common ground, and doing that. So I'm embarrassed to say that we don't have a standing, proactive meeting here in Washington, D.C. that I know of where African Americans and Latinos, we get together and have coffee and say, let's talk about what we can do. We do it when we need to do it. But we need to be more proactive in doing it. And that would be my solution, Dr. Houston, when we get ready to end this thing. That's my solution.
So we need to be more proactive than reactive. In Georgia, that population grew over 300% because of the Olympics and the need for people to work in construction. And that brought a lot of specifically Mexican Americans to Georgia. Yes. Well, we're going to talk about solutions in just a minute. We're only going to take 2 more questions because we want to have the panelists to propose solutions, brief solutions to this issue. Please.
Good afternoon.
Thank you.
My name is Ben Monterroso. I'm an immigrant from Guatemala and a citizen of this country for many years. Not 15 like you, but at least 12. More than anything is a comment. I think that what I have seen here is the unity that we have and the issues that unite us. But we also need to understand that this movement is very still young as much as we've been working together for many, many years, because it hasn't been consistency. I came to this country in 1977 and live in California, and I seen the change where African Americans and Latinos get a little bit more closer together. Is it perfect? No, it's not. Is it ever going to be perfect? I hope we achieve to do that. So I just want to say that there's 2 things that I will say, not as a solution, but how do we more consistently and deliberately use and see the school districts as the way to unify? Because, I mean, that is what our youth is getting ahead of us with lack of leadership sometimes. And I also believe that if we are not serious about being not as a reacting to a campaign, I'm very concerned. This election, whoever wins in this election, we have a lot of work to do. And that work has to be done by all of us here. And I think that that's all I wanted to say, because I just feel that we are in the right path, but we're not perfect yet.
Thank you very much. We're going to ask the panelists to think about that for your closing remarks. He specifically wants, how can we be consistent on our efforts to work together as 2 communities? Thank you very much for that question. This will be the last question, and we're asking you to be brief again. Thank you. You look like a scholar, so you can go on. Yeah, thank you, exactly.
Looks so deceiving. 2 questions. Yes or no, to be brief. How many of you agree with, and I apologize, the young lady in the glasses who said that we are all fighting for the same resources? You said something similar to that, right?
Cannibalizing.
Everybody agree to that?
Yes.
Okay. This can help. I'm asking a question, hope to get to some of these solutions. So that's why a lot of the problems we have. We're fighting for the same resources. And secondly, position on what's called illegal immigration. Is that supported by the group or not?
What part of it?
The issue of illegal immigration. The people who are here.
I think,
Well, I use illegal because you have to have some form of document to exist.
I think words matter. So it would be more appropriate to say, do you believe in comprehensive immigration reform or not? Or, but get to your question. What we do, I just want us to be. I want us to make sure that we use our words carefully, not to be offensive. That's what I'm saying.
I didn't mean to offend anyone, but it is my understanding that undocumented means you don't have documents. This will help me to understand something.
Okay.
How do you function in society without a document?
Okay, so we're going to have, we'll have somebody to address comprehensive immigration reform without getting into a back and forth, please. One of the panelists, that would be one of the policy people that knows about that. Okay, so now with this last few minutes that we have, we're going to ask the panelists to propose specific solutions on how they see we can work together in terms of promoting African American Latino relations, and we're asking each one to limit their comments to 1 minute. Thank you, so the congressman can have the final words.
Are we answering the question?
Yes, I'm saying answer it in your solution.
Okay.
Could someone whisper to her? So 1 minute, please, for each of the panelists, and then we're going to have the final words from the congressman. Thank you. We can start at that end of the table. Thank you.
Thank you. From my perspective, I mean, the African American experience can support to some issues in Latin America. I was talking about for example, the bilateral agreement, Colombian and U.S. Capri. Also, we had the JPER in Brazil, and another agreement Uruguay. In terms of education, my man, and we're trying to do more agreements with the ABCUs and the universities. For example, in Colombia, University of the Pacific Coast. We're trying to develop that agenda. And also diversity and inclusion. I have been the last month at the NABJ National Convention of African American journalists, joined with the Hispanics journalists. And we was talking about diversity and inclusion and how that experience can help to the Afro-Colombians. And also in the business, we, Alejandra, we can work together because the Colombia is the place to go right now after the peace accord. And it's a lot of resources, a lot of money, but I mean, the black population is blind about how they develop the issues.
Okay, thank you. So his solutions are working with HBCUs, historically black colleges and universities. Also working with the media. We have the National Association of Black Journalists and the National Association of Hispanic Journalists who had their national conventions last month here in DC. The business aspect as well. Okay, next panelist, please. Thank you.
Yes, a couple of ideas that come through. First of all, challenging you to use your sphere of influence within particular organizations you belong to. The number one within your organization, push your organization to be an example of a coalition of the willing. For example, in the NEA, we have an Ethnic Minority Affairs Committee, which has pushed us to move into some directions around institutional racism and helping our members work in the education systems to help break down some of those things that are pushing black and brown students out of school or not giving them access and opportunity. I'd also challenge you to look for all those opportunities. The Rum brother talked about school boards and school districts. Education is a wonderful place where we can collaborate. You know, we work with various partners around several issues. One of our partners is here from Advancement Project, Dewana Nicole, who's been working with us around the school to prison pipeline work. It's those opportunities that you can bring other groups and organizations together to build coalitions to start moving. It only takes one issue, I believe, to help bring our groups together. And I think education is a wonderful issue because everyone cares about their children, and we want to make sure that the students are being successful.
Thank you very much. His solutions were working within our organizations, our organizational influence to be the example. Instead of looking at what everybody else is doing, let us be the example. Systemic issues that we can discuss, we can work on together. One issue that he proposed was education. Thank you very much.
So I want to close by saying a couple of things. One is we have enough data that the case to support minority business is compelling and persuasive. We don't need any more data. We have enough data to tell you that every time you invest in minority-owned companies, you are changing the nature of a community, you are creating wealth, you are creating jobs, and it's good for the nation. So the data is there. But 4 things very concretely. Support your minority-owned businesses. Support your minority-owned businesses, whether they're in your neighborhoods or they're companies throughout the regions that you live. We need to support our minority-owned companies. 2 is exercise your power as consumers. Make sure that when you patron a company, a large company, ask them what their supply chain looks like. Who's supplying them? Who's part of that supply chain? Are there minority-owned firms? Are they truly integrating minority-owned companies in their supply chain? 3 is, this conversation is fantastic. Whomever is elected as President of the United States, this black and brown conversation should have a 100-day plan. A 100-day plan that they have to read, that they should incorporate into their administration. And let's remember, there are 3 branches of government: our executive, our legislative, and our judiciary. And we need to leverage all 3 of them if we want to make some change. And finally, I'll tell you this. We launched yesterday our Inclusive Innovation Initiative. We're calling it I3. We've sent a letter to inform our members of Congress, particularly the Tri-Caucus, that STEM is not just about HR. When we go to Silicon Valley, we are not only talking about how many people work in those companies, but how many entrepreneurs are they engaging? Because unless we become part of that ecosystem as entrepreneurs, checking the box on an HR is very easy. It is about integrating our businesses into technology and innovation so that we are part of that massive industrial change in our nation. So I wanted to close with that because I'm very committed to making sure that minorities are also wealth creators, and that conversation about wealth is not juxtaposed to civil rights. It's okay to make money. It is okay to make money and create wealth in our communities. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Support and invest in minority-owned companies. Exercise our power as consumers. A 100-day plan. Somebody needs to take that one on, like right now. And for our next president in terms of Black-Brown relations and inclusive innovation initiative, and be a part of the ecosystem of STEM fields. Thank you very much.
So I think that particularly after this election, regardless of what happens, there is going to be a lot of folks who have a very divisive and separatist view of our nation who are going to be emboldened and empowered to continue to make that case. So I think it's going to be very important for our communities, regardless of what government does, but also in pressuring for government to address those rifts, to come together to create that story of us for all Americans to come together and really try to, once again, back in the corner those fringe elements that have gained a great deal of prominence. I think that there's a couple of immediate opportunities ahead of us. I would not say that these are the things that everybody who's Black or brown needs to work with, because frankly, we have to remember that the best way for people to come and work together is to solve something that is a necessity in their communities. But I think that this is important at the federal level, and it has reverberations in a lot of our communities. And again, because of the way that these issues both have incredible undermining effects in our communities, and because the way that they are used to demonize our communities, those issues are going to be around criminal justice and police brutality. I think immigration reform, which is really at a deeper level, not about immigration, but about who's worthy of being an American. And just to keep on the thread of education, I think that with NUL, one of the ways that we're trying to be proactive is to visualize how do we do that defense of the education system that serves our kids at the state level now that the ESSA passed, and looking at different states in which we can work very locally and at ground level to defend standards and accountability. Because let me tell you, now that our kids are the majorities in schools, there's an effort to say that we don't need standards and we don't need accountability, because that's not the way that education should happen. What that means is that now that our students are there, people want to sweep under the rug how schools are being measured to prove and demonstrate that they're serving our students. We need to engage in that debate, and we cannot let people do away with standards. We need to be part of how we define those standards, but we cannot let people now that they don't want to be accountable for the education of our children to do away with those things. And the last thing I would say is that cross-pollination is incredibly important. It is an honor for me to be here. I'm sorry that we didn't have a chance to address this earlier. My organization is not an individual membership organization, so maybe that's one reason the sister couldn't join, but this has come up before. We all have our different conferences and our different, gatherings at the state level, at the local level to bring communities together. I welcome all of you to attend our next national conference, which is free and open to the public. But that's not the only thing. So let's figure out how do we foster those spaces of cross-pollination, which we can look at how to leverage each other's experiences, skills, and approaches to really bust this notion of we gotta fight for the crumbs, right? And I think in the next 4 years, one area to focus efforts to really bust this limited resources paradigm under which our communities are placed is to really be ready for the fight for redistricting, because that is where we get boxed in a state of permanent limited representation and resources. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Her solutions were criminal justice reform, immigration reform, education, and holding, specifically with ESSA, defending the standards and making that those accountable. I know young people perform to the level of expectation. And so if you don't have standards, then you won't meet any standards. And we need to make sure we continue to have standards in our school systems and hold them accountable, and then working together, attending each other's organizational events. Thank you very much.
And don't forget redistricting.
Redistricting, thank you, thank you.
My solution is that when I look at the whole picture, it is that harmony must precede justice. And in order for us to reach a level of harmony that could lead to justice, then we have to work at a grassroots level. We also have to work at an institutional level. So I think at a grassroots level, it is all of us. With social media, we are all influencers today. And our institutions, large organizations, we have to request, for example, that we place Afro-Latinos, for example, in the boards. The reason is because I do believe that Afro-Latinos can play a critical role in this solution because of the access that we have to both communities. And I think that until we don't place unapologetic leaders in these positions, we won't make progress, because this is something that I did here at the United Nations. There is no progress without truth. So you have to put people in those places that is willing to speak the truth that will lead us to progress.
Thank you very much. Grassroots and organizational institutional work. Josue, you're the last one.
I know. I don't get more time right now. I'm just joking. I was listening to an interview by Desmond Tutu, and I'm only going to lead because I think it's important. Desmond Tutu said that during the South African fight to end apartheid, he said they had to realize how big their enemy was. He said that they were fighting for a long time separate movements. And he said what happens is they got together and they were like, look, we're fighting against this huge thing that none of us are going to be able to defeat alone. And I think that, and I want to posit that as the first thing that we have to realize. We're not fighting against one another. We're not fighting parallel to each other. There are bigger things that we're fighting, and that we have to work together on that. And that at the moment that we realize that, is going to help us out to realize what the solution is. I have a few solutions. I think number one, I'm going to echo what Clarissa said. We have to be very involved in local voting and local politics. Sometimes we expect too much of the change to come from the top. Most of the change always comes from the bottom and comes from us voting elected officials in localities and in communities that are going to be able to make changes. So I think we have to get active. I was very encouraged by recently reading articles of how many undocumented folks or former undocumented folks are now registering to vote and are registering as citizens, and the citizenship numbers went up over the last few months because they're afraid. They're like, we can't play this game of waiting around, and I'm very encouraged by that. So I think that to address that undocumented thing, the reason we choose, there are different ways that we choose the term. The illegal is a term that we choose not to use in our social environment. I understand your point of undocumented. You can't be undocumented if you don't live, but that's the term that we use because it just means documents that are accepted here. So just to posit that. But I think all of us here are pro-immigration reform in whatever form that looks like, and I think we have different ways. I also want to think, another solution that I think is very important is to recognize international efforts and how we can use them here. Hernando mentioned something very important. This is, a lot of people don't know sometimes that the UN declared this the International Decade of People of African Descent. So for 10 years, the UN is supposed, the different nations of the member nations of the UN are supposed to enact policies and different ideas in which they're helping people of African descent throughout the world. And I think it's good to recognize how we can help to that conversation. And then I think that just some overall things, I think a sense of community would help, right? Instead of a sense of us being against each other will help. I think understanding that racial justice affects all of us. Racial justice is something that affects the Latino community as much as it affects the African American community and other Black communities around. I think that dialogue dialogues like these are very important. And I'm going to add to that, daily dialogue in yourself. You have friends, you have family members, you have people that you're around, and that, you know, if they misunderstand how the Latino community looks like, and how the Black community looks like, and how the African American community works, that's a jumping point where you can say, you know, actually there are Blacks who speak Spanish, and maybe we don't recognize them. That's a simple thing. And the last thing that I want to say is, I think, transparency. I think that we need to be transparent as organizations, as individuals, in the challenges that we have. Is there a challenge of access for sometimes some folk to join some organizations? Sure, right? But like Larissa said, we're not a member organization. It's a whole different thing. Sure, but we can't just make generic statements and say, well, all the Latinos, all Black African Americans. That's not true. And we can't say all African Americans, Black Latinos. That's not true either. So we have to be transparent with challenges that we have in our communities. And transparency leads to trust, and trust leads to a lot of change. And those are the things I want to do.
Thank you very much. Now, with that being said, his points are working together, understanding the magnitude of the challenges we're facing, local voting, international efforts, creating a sense of community, understanding that racial justice affects us all, promoting dialogue within our community, and transparency. We're over the time for this panel, and I want to make sure that the Congressman has the last words. Thank you so much for attending this session. This is an exciting week in DC because we have both the Congressional Hispanic Caucus Institute as well as the Congressional Black Caucus on both conferences this week and at this convention center. So we're very excited to be able to have both of these at the same time, because usually they're weeks apart. So thank you very much for attending, Congressman.
Thank you. Let's give Dr. Ramona Houston a hand for conducting a great panel. And all of the panelists, I thank you so much for your contribution to what we've done today. And basically, ladies and gentlemen, after having traveled around the world as a congressman for the last 10 years, I can report to you that Black folks, for lack of a better descriptive term, Black folks catch hell across the world. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't really matter whether or not you are a light-skinned Black person or a dark-skinned Black person, because everybody knows that you're not white. So you get put in the same basket and treated accordingly. And so, therefore, our challenge is a global challenge. It's not just a neighborhood challenge or a where you're from. It's actually a global challenge. And so in order to meet this challenge, we're going to have more conversations like we've had today. We've had kind of like a panel throwout too and some regurgitation back, but we actually have to get to the point where we can have like a round circular discussion with experts in whatever field you might be in and generalists who are just talking about social trends and that kind of thing. All kinds of people just sitting around talking about things, asking questions from your own perspective, and then everyone kind of responding to it. And in that way, we can create greater understanding, and also out of that comes some unity of purpose about what we're going to do next. Mm-hmm. I'll tell you what we need to do next right here in America right now is to weigh in heavily on this presidential election. I think the choice is clear. We have a guy who is doing everything he can to divide folks based on fear, and he may win. And if he does, then it's gonna be bad for us. One of the biggest reasons is because he'll get a chance to appoint the next Supreme Court justice who will break the tie. Right now it's a 4-4 court. And that 4-4 court used to be a 5-4 court, and shortly before he died, Justice Scalia from the bench talked about questioned whether or not these African American students actually are well served by being at the University of Texas.
Yeah.
Maybe they're better off in their own institutions of higher learning. That's the mentality that was going to prevail in the decision in that case. But as fate would have it, the man passed, the man died. And there are a lot of other decisions that remain to be decided by the U.S. Supreme Court, whether or not it will be a Scalia majority or whether or not it will be a more progressive-minded Ruth Bader Ginsburg majority on the court is in our hands. And if we don't act in our best interest in this upcoming election, then the consequences can take us back to Plessy versus Ferguson in 1896, when the door was slammed on equal rights, or equal opportunity, I'll say. So I would encourage us to just strive to be global citizens. I really look around you all, and I can't tell you, when I came in here, I assumed that all of these black folks in here were African Americans. I just assumed it. But then when they started calling out all of the folks who speak Spanish in here, I don't even know if African Americans are in the majority. And that's a good thing. That's a really good thing. And so thank you, brothers and sisters, for your participation. I think next year we're going to probably do something else. This is not the first panel that Dr. has chaired for me, and she does such a good job. We're going to have her back again, and we'll work harder to have a focused panel for next year, and I hope you all will come back and add to it. And I see Frederick Douglass back here wants to. Shall I give him 10 seconds? All right.
Thank you. I wanted to clarify something. I was specifically told, because it was a legislative session, to use legal terms and not to use undocumented. I just wanted to make that clear. So it would be helpful if maybe there was some guidelines and language on the door. Because some things are affected. Some folks, I do not want to be offensive.
Yeah. And you know what? And I don't think anybody was offended either. I really
Actually, just a quick, I don't think that it matters whether you are in a legislative or any other kind of environment. I think that within our communities and the non-nativist community, undocumented immigrant is going to be right in every setting you are.
And that goes back to what I was saying before about education and words matter. Sometimes we just don't know.
We got to be sensitive.
We just don't know. And so that's why I said we could have that side conversation later at some point in time, just because of time.
But I assume everybody in here has got a good, clean heart and wants to do what's best for everyone. So thank y'all so much.
I didn't know.